Welcome back to week 4 of the Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along. I'm going to show you how to get started and to dive into this week's featured stitch, the Traveling Vine Stitch. Before we get started with that, please consider subscribing to our channel. My name's Holly, this is At Yarn's Length, and here we cover knitting, crochet, crafting, sometimes traveling, and anything else that I get into. And I post the videos here, including every week's pattern for the Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along. If you click subscribe, you'll receive a notification when those videos are posted, so you'll be able to watch them first. This is Traveling Vine Stitch. I really like it because it creates a pretty twisted kind of vine look, but I think it's easy to get distracted by these stitches. I think the beauty in the vine is actually in these negative spaces. So unlike our last vine, which was a little bit more cable-y, even though it wasn't technically cabled, this one's more of a lacy pattern. And I think the negative space is really where the beauty is at. Ooh, sorry about that wiggle. So I did enjoy working this pattern, but it's one of those where each of the rows, and you can probably tell by looking at it, the rows are very similar. They just sort of shift. The stitches shift from left to right as to where they're positioned in the row. And so that can make it kind of hard to follow because row 1 looks a little like row 3, looks a little like row 5. They all have the same stitches just moved over. It's easy to lose your spot. So I used highlighter tape and moved it as I went along. You can also use index cards if you want to put one row per index card. That way you're never looking at more than one, so you'll never lose your spot. But just as a heads up, you will need something to keep track on this particular stitch. For this video, I'll be knitting a swatch. You can knit a swatch with me, or you can go ahead and get started on the panel for the knit along. I've provided instructions for both, and then there are also written instructions for the panel or for the adaptable pattern for any project you want to use it in. The standard traveling vine stitch patterns worked in multiples of 8 plus 2, so I've cast on 10, and it's over 12 rows. I did modify it a little bit to fit this knit along, but for the most part it was a tidy fit. The original and modified patterns, like I said, are both included below, so you can follow those links. And our first step is, of course, to cast on, which I've already done. And I use the knitted cast on. You can use whatever your favorite cast on is. So for the swatch, you can cast on 10 stitches, which was our multiple of 8 plus 2. And if you're knitting for the knit along and you're making your panel, you want to cast on 66 stitches, which has been our constant so far. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with row 1. We'll make some increases on this row, and we're only working one repeat. If you're working the panel, you'll do the repeat, which is the center 8 stitches. You'll do that 8 times, but we're only going to do it once. So we'll always start with this knit 1 and end with a knit 1. Those are just our edge stitches that kind of frame everything up. So we'll knit 1. We're going to yarn over, knit 1 through the back loop, yarn over, slip 1, knit 1, pass our slips. Well, maybe pass our slip stitch over. There we go. And then knit 5. And then we end with a knit 1. So the knit 5 is the end of the repeat. Knit 1 is what we do after we're done with the repeats. So it actually ends with 6 stitches that are knit. This unfortunately is a pattern where you can't rest on the wrong side. So what I mean by that is every wrong side actually has instructions. They're not just all knits or purls. So that's row 1. Maybe, you know, if you did the swatch, you can make a bookmark. It's kind of about wide enough to, to swatch on down and do that. You may have noticed in row 1 we had 2 increases and only 1 decrease. So we are going to increase a stitch per repeat, but with the even rows we're going to bring those back down. So with the wrong side rows we'll bring them back down to what they're supposed to be. So for row 2, just like every other row, we start with a knit 1, and then we're going to do a purl 4 if my needles cooperate. And you may notice my stitches look a little wonky. It's because I already lost my place and messed up this row once and had to go back and re-record this. So Knit 1, purl 4. And now we're going to purl 2 together through the back loops. And oh my goodness, this is a stitch, right? So this is a regular purl 2 together. A purl 2 together through the back loops goes this way, okay? And so it is an awkward stitch to work. Okay, and that's what it looks like. So I'm gonna actually go back and do that again so you guys can see it. We're gonna purl 2 together through the back loop. So you come in this way from this side of the stitch, okay? So I'm gonna turn it this way so you can see. It's not as awkward as it looks when I'm trying to do it slowly, but it is a bit awkward, okay? And so what you're doing with this stitch, let me clear that out of the way. What you're doing with this stitch, the purl 2 together through the back loop, is it leans to the right. You can see the slant. And so on the other side, we look at the right side, it leans to the left. And so it's kind of like a slip-slip knit, and that's what we're trying to mirror, is the look of the slip-slip knit. But obviously we're on the wrong side for that. Okay. So purl 2 together through the back loop, and then purl 3. You can hear my cables clacking. And then knit 1. And this is what we've got after row 2. Okay. On to row 3. I have to be careful to keep my place on the pattern. All right, we're gonna start again with a knit 1, just like we have every other time. Yarn over, knit 1 through that back loop. And be careful, I just split my yarn. It is a splitty yarn, and these are very sharp needles. Yarn over again, knit 2. Slip 1, knit 1, pass the slip stitch over, knit 3. And knit 3 is the end of our repeat, but we have a knit 1 after the final repeat, so we knit the last one as well. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, we're using the same actual stitches from row to row. We're just moving down where we're working them, so everything's sliding this way. Row 4 starts with a knit 1, and then we'll be purling again. We're going to purl 2, purl 2 together through the back loop. So try to do it on camera as clearly as possible. There we go, creating that slant. And then purl 5. Oops, sorry, I bumped the camera there. Oh goodness, can you hear my stomach rumbling? If you can, I'm sorry. All right, and we knit the final stitch. Okay, I repositioned the camera a little bit, so hopefully you guys aren't going to get as much bumping and can still see clearly. So we're starting to see our lace take shape here, and then kind of the vine that's created with that raised stitch take place here. If you are working the panel and have done lots of repeats, you probably picked up on the fact that the wrong side of the pattern, which is the even rows, they all have 7 purls and then a purl 2 together through the back loop, which will later be a purl 2 together as well. So every wrong side row is 7 stitches, decrease, 7 stitches, decrease. The thing is, because of the way the repeats are placed, you're not purling 7 and then decreasing, you're purling 2, decreasing and purling 5, but the 5 at the end of one repeat and the 2 at the beginning of the next one combine to make 7. So if you haven't picked up on that already, it is kind of an easy way to go between repeats, just keeping in mind that you need 7 and a decrease, 7 and a decrease. Okay, so row 5, we are going to start with a knit 1. We're gonna knit one through the back loop, yarn over, knit 4, slip 1, knit 1, and pass the slip stitch over. That's what's creating our raised stitch right here that kind of vines throughout. Knit 1, yarn over, and then our final stitch. So don't forget that yarn over, especially in the last repeat. And this is it. Row 6 also begins with a knit 1, purl 1, purl 2 together through the back loop, so coming sideways. There we go. And purl 6. So the purl 1 and the purl 6, if you're doing the repeat, those are the 7 stitches I mentioned earlier. And since I'm just doing 1, I know that I'm going to purl all the way to the end, and the last stitch is a knit 1. So after row 6, and you can see there's a little bit of pull here already. I can show you the shaping on the final panel and how that plays out. It does have a good bit of curl, so it is a little harder to see. Oh, that's the wrong end. It does have a little bit of curl, but you can see there's definitely a wave to it. So you could use this at the bottom of a project, even at the bottom of a sweater. That would be a really pretty edge that you wouldn't have to do much to in terms of doing ribbing or anything like that. You could just leave this as the final edge, and it would be quite lovely, I think. Okay, we're on to row 7. And again, these right side rows were increasing and the wrong side rows were decreasing. So 7 starts with a knit 1, then we're going to knit 5, knit 2 together, just a classic knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 1 through the back loop, and it's a little awkward here with the way the stitches have been placed over this yarn over, but we got it. Through the back loop, yarn over, and then this is our final stitch, so we knit 1. For the next row, which is row 8, we're going to start with a knit 1. And I think this does help with curling. I don't actually have much curl on the panel on the ends because of the knit stitch at the end. And then we know we're going to purl, right? So we purl 3. But starting here, we're at the second half of the pattern, rows 7 and 8, the second half of the pattern. So after we purl 3, we're just doing a classic purl 2 together for the second half, which is a bit of a relief. And then we know we're going to purl 4 to complete our 7. And for the final, knit 1. This is what everything looks like after row 8. So you can definitely see some shapes in there. Maybe not the pattern that you recognize from the finished product, but definitely something is taking shape. For row 9, we're going to start with a knit 1, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 2, yarn over, knit 1 through the back loop, yarn over, and knit 1 for our final stitch. Okay. For row 10, I'm going to start with a knit 1, purl 5, oops, Sometimes it's tough for me to see exactly where the stitches are under the camera mount and keep them on screen for you. So sometimes I'm kind of knitting at nothing, and that's why. Okay, so we've knit or purled 5. We're going to purl 2 together, just straight up purl 2 together, purl 2, and of course knit our last stitch. So well, there you go, we got something happening here. Look at that. That's starting to really take shape. Okay, final 2 rows. For the right side, we're on row 11. We're going to start with a knit 1. For the repeat of the pattern, yarn over, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 4, yarn over, and knit 1 through the back loop. And then our final stitch after the repeats is a knit stitch, and we've got this. It doesn't really look like much, but put a bunch of them together and they look lovely. And then our final wrong side, we're going to knit 1, purl 6, purl 2 together, purl 1, and then our final stitch is a knit 1. So these 12 rows, I'm sorry, those needles are so loud. These 12 rows form the pattern. There you go, that's what the little sample looks like. So if you're knitting the swatch, yours should look something like this. If you're working the panel, you're going to repeat, like I said, 8 times across, but you're also going to repeat 8 times, these 12 rows 8 times total. So that'll give you 96, and you'll have 1 knit row before you bind off. As I said before, the written pattern is down below. You can follow the link to that, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. And I hope to see you next week for the next installment of the Winter Stitch Sampler Knit Along. Bye!